I said this before, but software truly is a service industry. Roughly 2/3 of revenues are tied to service type relationships. And if you look around, the IBMs, the Oracles, SAPs, HPs, Red Hat, whatever, they're making money from services. I mean, IBM's a big open source supporter, right? And they're not doing this because they're stupid. They've been around a long time and make a lot of money. They're doing it because they know that the framework and the tools that they're developing can be assembled for customers in contracts that may cost hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars. So they're not dumb, they know what they're doing. I think I've said this, I'm going to jump ahead here. So one thing that I want to remind us again, that open source can help grow a business by leveraging the work, ideas, and communities of others to create something of value. It's a great way to hire, to market, sell, and advertise through community outreach. It's a great way to raise capital because the capital may not be money, but it may be people that are willing to contribute pieces back to the community. And it's a superb way to do service, support, and collaborate with other people. So if we look at it in sort of the standard way, normally on the left you see if you're putting together a system, you purchase your hardware, you probably buy a bunch of software licenses, you might pay a little money for services to sort of integrate. But as we move towards the open source world, the cost of the software goes towards zero and services expand. So what we're doing actually is cutting out the licensing part and trying to expand the services part. And that's sort of our business model. And in order, to address the business needs, there's a really wide spectrum of potential ways to engage businesses, ranging from being a hobbyist, which a lot of students do. We do it because we love it, it's fun, all the way down to more sophisticated stuff like R&D, research and development, collaboration platforms, which is what we do. So I'm going to go very quickly through some of these to remind us of what these business models look like. Hobbyists, generally it's just for fun. Communities, open source communities are fantastic because you meet incredible people. I'm going to Estonia this year because I was invited to do a keynote speech at a conference on KDE. This would have never happened to me without the community, right? They know about GitWare and about what we do, and I have the privilege to speak about it. And I travel a lot, and these communities form in an international way, and it's just a delight to meet people, interact with people with different takes on the world and different skill sets and so on. And we absolutely love that. Oftentimes, hobbyists are done outside their real job. So if you're a student, you may, you do what you have to do to get your grades, and then, between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., you're pounding out some code. Great, wonderful stuff. Just there's a couple issues you have to watch. For example, you may have signed an agreement, I don't know how it works here at Albany, but which says that anything you do, depending on how you're doing it, may be owned by the university. They're generally freer here in the university. But if you do this while you're working for a business, typically you sign a proprietary information agreement on the first day of joining the job, which says that anything you do is owned by the employer. So you've got to be careful about these sort of hobbies because they may not actually belong to you without permission and clearance. A lot of people think of open source business as being really a nonprofit activity. The financial rewards aren't really what it's about. It's more about the collaboration and sharing, that sort of thing. And the classic example is the Apache Software Foundation. In 2003, it started off with a minuscule amount of revenues and assets and so on. I'm sure they're a lot bigger now. If you look at a company like Microsoft, it makes these sort of revenues in just seconds. So it's not about the money if you're doing a nonprofit. Although, having said that, I just saw an article about a week ago which listed the salaries of some of the people running the nonprofit open source initiatives around the world, and some of them were up in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, so they're doing pretty well. Consulting, what I mean by that are really good developers who are part of a community, and people contact them or they contact businesses to do specialized things like, I'll provide some support for this particular toolkit or this particular application, open source. It tends to be small teams or just one person. It's a great way to sort of get your feet wet into it. Typically it's a freelance sort of thing. You can often do it around a normal job as long as you've got the IP stuff straightened out. The main thing is you need to know what you're worth, how to charge, and how to sort of manage the accounting and that sort of thing, but that's generally not a big deal for most people. Another classic model is donations. Some people thrive off of donations, like Firefox here. They when they sort of went big time asking for donations, they were able to raise $250,000 in 10 days to buy some advertising in a major paper. Don't need to belabor that. I think we all know this model. Oftentimes people think of open source business models as being about service and support. Certainly, to some extent, Red Hat does this. And they also think about books, documentation, training, customization. We found that books and documentation, that sort of support stuff, is probably 1 or 2% of our revenues in our company. So it's not a lot of money. What does work well in certain applications, like Red Hat provides support and services for their enterprise Linux, Red Hat Linux. They basically have a subscription model, and what they do there is they package everything, make it easy to use, they provide a certain amount of support, and they guarantee a certain amount of stability, and so on. A lot of people will pay for that because they want their servers running, full-time, all the time. One thing to note here is that we found in our company, if you have a service model, say you have an open source company, you have a bunch of really smart developers, they're developing cool stuff. At the same time, you're trying to make money by providing services, bug fixes, stuff like that. Turns out they're really good developers hate to do bug fixes sometimes. They don't want to talk to customers. They don't want to provide service. And so you can get in a situation where you have a culture clash. And you have to do creative things like rotate your developers through the service desk, the support desk. Because if you don't do that, people get annoyed and it doesn't work so well. There's other sort of models similar to this, like you can sponsor bugs, and there's bug bounties, and these things can net you, a few $1,000s. Another related way to do it is to sell stuff like t-shirts, mugs, gadgets, and so on. You can host conferences or seminars, and all these things can raise some decent revenue, but it's pretty small potato stuff. It's 1 or 2, sort of support 1 or 2 or 3 people in a year, depending on the size of the community. Another common way, we all know about this, advertising. If you've got a really popular open source site, obviously you can place a bunch of logos on it and do all sorts of stuff to generate some revenue through advertising. We don't do much of that. We sort of advertise ourselves. We just don't like the look of websites that are just plastered with advertisements. Now, one of the most controversial ways of making money with open source software is this approach called dual licensing, where you use something like a GPL, which hopefully you guys know what that means, but it's basically a reciprocal license where basically it says that if you take this code and you modify it and you do something to it, and then you sell a product based on this code, you basically have to release that code, that modified code, and anything that touches that code. All right. There's enough uncertainty about what this means that it scares businesses to death. And so they don't like to deal with these reciprocal GPL type licenses. So there's a way to take advantage of this by saying, I have full ownership and copyright ownership of the software. It's under GPL. Anybody can use it, no problem. But if I'm a company and I want to use it under a different license, so I don't have to worry about this GPL nonsense, I have proprietary code that's going to touch the software base. If you pay me money, I will change the license from GPL to something else and give it to you. Right? So that dual license is almost like a Trojan horse sort of thing. It has generated some serious money for some people. MySQL was purchased by Sun for $1 billion, right? So that's serious money. And Trolltech was purchased by Nokia, sort of the first step in a long series of transactions. And others have sort of used this model to sort of make things work out. Problem is, most open source advocates are not happy with it because it seems like a perversion of sharing and collaboration and community. They don't like it. Subscription model, basically we talked about this with Red Hat. Basically, you provide some services and support on a constant basis. You can optimize code, so we develop a lot of computing code. Sometimes it's a bit slow. People will pay us to improve performance. So we've got money like that. What we do is basically, in our primary amount of money coming to us is basically we do collaboration with scientists like UAlbany or RPI or MIT or University of North Carolina or whatever. We sort of go in together as a research team. We develop computational infrastructure and data. We then reap the benefit of research money, and we build frameworks, which are all open source. Then we turn around and take these frameworks and integrate it into customers' workflow. So it's a very pure model in that we're not playing any games trying to hide software. We're not trying to package things and keep you from the software. We're not doing dual licensing. We're doing something to basically collaborate and exchange data and software with you. I think I've said this, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go into this. But I do want to make the point that open source and research is something that's of growing importance, including, for example, the Department of Defense put out this report listed here. And they basically said that the DoD has said that open source software are important to the national security and national interests of the U.S. for the following reasons. Ability to adapt to user needs being the military. The industry is more likely to compete on ideas and execution versus vendor lock-in. What this means is, this is really important because we've seen this in action. I bid on a weapons system or a software package for a National Institute of Health. Millions of dollars gets paid to me. My software is proprietary, right? The funding stream stops. What happens to software? Well, it disappears. They've lost it. So they're now dependent on that vendor to keep that program going. That's a real problem. If it's open source, everyone throws it out there. The funding agencies can say, "Get where you're doing great. I want you to continue doing what you're doing. Company X, you're not doing so well. You're out. We're going to find someone else to do it." So there's more ability to change out the vendors. And of course, it's a security issue too, because you can basically understand what's going on underneath the hood. And you can mix these things. You can mix them proprietary models so you get the right license. And the reminder that you still have to use standard business fundamentals of HR, finance, marketing, sales, and legal to make the business work. So I'm going to stop there. I think we have time for a couple questions.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions.
Yep.
Somebody?
Shoot. They're interested in the food.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
You say you like to hire good people.
Yes.
Do you have any summer internships for students?
We do.
You do?
We do.
Could you just what kind of jobs would they be doing?
Well, so it sort of depends. We have interns ranging from high school students up to PhDs, postdoc type. And depending on the skill set of that person, they will end up in different places. So if you're really good at, say, algorithms, you might end up sort of working with a researcher or staff person to sort of help expand the algorithm or extend the algorithm. If you're really good at software, you might end up working with someone like Bill, some real software leader, integrating systems or working on bugs or adding new features. If you're a lower level, sort of a high school intern or someone just starting, you're probably going to do stuff like annotating data, ground truthing, things like that. Which is, it's a good way to learn, but it's tedious.
It's a start.
Yeah, it's a start. So.
Thank you.
Sure.